Human beings are wonderful and messy and unpredictable. And while we're all humans, we're really not all the same, are we? We are different in so many ways. And yet, as leaders, we must lead all of those different folks, even if they are really different from us. And that's our focus today: how to lead people who are not like us. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders like you grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this podcast in the future, you could join us live on your favorite social media platform. And so to find out when those are happening, in this case, you'd have been here 2 months sooner if you're watching this when it first comes out or listening to this when it first comes out. So if you want to find out how to join us live, you can join one of two groups, one on Facebook and one on LinkedIn, to get all the information about when we're going live, how you can join us, and why you'd want to join us early. And you can do that by going to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to get all of that info and to sign up to join us there. Today's episode is brought to you by my latest book, Flexible Leadership: Navigate Uncertainty and Lead with Confidence. It is time to realize that styles can get in our way, and that following our strengths might not always be the best approach. In a world more complex and uncertain than ever, leaders need a new perspective, a new set of tools to create the great results their organizations and team members need. And that's what Flexible Leadership provides you. Learn more and order your copy today at remarkablepodcast.com/flexible. And so with that, let me bring in my lovely and talented guest, and let me tell you a little bit about Stephanie Chung. She is the author of Allyship: How to Lead People Who Are Not Like You. And she is the first African-American president of a private aviation company. Under her leadership, her sales team consistently exceeded their nearly $1 billion annual sales quota. And with over 30 years of experience, she is a powerhouse in driving business growth and success. She's an author. She's our guest today on the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Stephanie, welcome.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I'm excited to be here. And thank you for that nice intro, by the way.
Well, your mother wrote it. So, okay. So here's the book, everybody, we're going to talk about. So I mentioned to you before we hit the record button, before we went live, I mentioned to you that it's one of the shortest intros I've ever received from a guest. And so why don't you color us in a little bit more. Tell us a little bit more about the journey that gets you here and then ultimately to the book. But let's just give us a little bit about your journey first, then we'll talk about the book.
Absolutely. So thank you for that. So I always start where the credit is due, which is I grew up a military child. So my dad was a master sergeant in the U.S. Air Force. So I'm a military brat, and I want to shout out to all military children because April is Military Child Month. So shout out to every single military child out there. And of course, all the men and women in our armed forces. But I started off, living on active Air Force bases. I was that kid, Kevin, that moved every 2 years of my life. So I was just always having to be the new kid, the person who always had to make friends, the new kid in the class, new kid in the neighborhood, etc. But early on, I knew I wanted to be in aviation just because I grew up listening to planes take off and land every single day of my life. So that part was easy. What was my very first job was parking planes and loading luggage at the Boston Logan Airport. That was my very first job. And that in the aviation.
She's got the flashlights.
I've got the flashlights. I can still park a plane, just so you know, Kevin. All right, I can still park a plane. So started off there, also worked at the ticket counter. And one day, one of the VPs of sales for this major airline that I worked for, he came through the airport and he said, Steph, every time I see you checking customers in with a smile on your face. I think we have you in the wrong position. I think you should be in sales. And so that then kind of pivoted my journey. So I originally, up until that point, Kevin, I was going into the operations route. But once he said that, I didn't know him that well, but I respected him just because of who he was and his title, et cetera. So they moved me into sales. So I sold for the airlines for many, many years. And then from there, I got recruited into private aviation, where I sold, private aviation jets and planes and all that stuff. And then eventually I got promoted, oversaw the team that sold the private aviation services, then got recruited into becoming a president. So that was one of the things that you referenced. So I became the first African-American president in the United States, leading a major private jet company. From there, then got recruited into another company, which was larger, and I was part of the executive team that helped take that company public. And so it's just been an amazing journey. So I did that, and then eventually just, wrote a book. And now I'm on the speaking circuit and really sharing with people the things that I've learned throughout my 40 years in the workforce, but specifically in aviation, because it's that's where your mind grows, right? Travel, I believe, is one of the biggest ways to expand your thought process and expand really just your mind in general. And so I've been really fortunate and blessed to be in an amazing industry. But now I serve on boards. I'm on the speaking circuit, and of course, as you mentioned, I've written a book as well.
So yeah, if you're going to have a speaking business, you probably ought to have a book, and so that's a reason to write the book. But I'm curious specifically why this book? Why
Yeah.
is this the topic that we're going to talk about today? Why has it become the focal point of your work?
Yes, it's a big passion of mine, and you're right. When I was, in my speaker journey, my speakers bureau had said, you should write a book because you get off stage and people are like, hey, does she have a book? Which at that time I did not, right? And I really didn't have a desire to write a book, but then I really and I also didn't have the time because I was still a working executive for publicly held companies. So I didn't have the time that it takes to write a book, as you well know. But then as my schedule started to sort itself out, and I really spent some time alone, and I'm a woman of faith, so I spent a lot of time in prayer about, if I was to write a book, what book would I be able to write that could really add some value to people in the world? And this book I am super passionate about. Obviously, I think where we are in the world, this book is really needed, but certainly I didn't know that 18 months ago, right? So the book itself, Ally Leadership, How to Lead People Who Are Not Like You. Ally is an acronym, and it stands for Ask, Listen, Learn, You Take Action. And so that is, for all leaders, this is the secret sauce. And I believe with everything that's going on in today's workforce, we as leaders have to know how to lead everybody, every race, every creed, every gender, right? I would say we have to know how to lead all God's children. And if you think about the workforce that we're dealing with, today in today's society, we've got 6 generations at work, Kevin, which is unheard of. That's never happened in our history. So we've got all the intergenerational stuff. And you and I both know Zoomers do not think and work the same as boomers, let's say, as an example. So every leader is dealing with all the different generations at work. The second part of the scenario we're working through is women are the majority of the population. So women being, that changes the dynamics in the workforce because we see things differently, we communicate differently. And then you take the demographics. So all the ethnic demographics are growing, non-ethnic demographics shrinking. That changes the dynamics in the workforce, as well as you have people with neurodiversity, people with different able-bodied folks. We have the LGBTQ plus community. So as leaders, we've got a whole lot of people that are not like each other, and they're not like us, and we're not like them. And so, however, in order for you to really level up your leadership, you're going to have to know how to lead today's workforce. And that's what this book is all about. It's not putting any shame towards anybody. It's something for all of us. And I'll be honest with you too, Kevin. What I found out there was a lot of books towards white men telling white men how to lead women and people of color. And I'm like, this conversation needs to go deeper and wider. It is for all leaders to know how to lead all people in today's day and age, because that's what's going to give you the competitive advantage to get the types of results that you require as a leader.
So we're going to talk about the 4. You said them briefly: an ally, ask, listen, learn, and you take the action. We're going to talk about that in a second. But I wanted to start here, and you've really answered it largely here. But I love a good acronym, everybody. First of all, from a learning perspective, it's good. From a marketing perspective, it's good. I love a good acronym, and none are better than this because it's not just the acronym that we can remember, but it's the idea of being an ally. And so I'm curious, number one, is if you chose that on purpose, or if you just said, hey, I got a word here, I got 4 letters, I'm going to put them together. But I love that before we unpack ALLY, that what you're saying is, for us to do the kind of things that you're talking about, get the kind of results that we hope to get, that we really need to be allies with those that we lead. So anything you want to say there before we start to unpack the 4
Yeah.
letters a little bit more?
Well, that's such a good question. No one's ever asked me that question before. And what I like about it is, yes, I could have named the book Allyship, right? How to lead people who are not like you. But I was very intentional not to do that, because then what happens is people then start to assume it's a book for, a DEI book, right? And it really isn't. It's a leadership book. And so what I'm basically saying to leaders is, here's the 4 things that you need to be able to master in order to be able to lead effectively, and especially lead those people who are not like you, which is pretty much, should be everybody at this. If you don't have a workforce that's not like you, you will, just because the world's changing so quickly, right? So yes, I appreciate, I really appreciate that question. But for me, when I looked at, well, what am I trying to convey? Well, I really want leaders to know, if you do these 4 simple things, this is what's helped me get to the highest level, and I believe it can help them as well. And though it sounds super simple, as you know, I dive into the book because it's not that simple, right? It's not as easy as, oh yeah, just ask. No. You got to ask, you listen, got to learn, and then you have to take action, right? So those 4 have to come together. It can't be I'm doing one of the 3.
So let's talk about it a little bit. Actually, I want to. Throughout the book, you have all sorts of stories, right? And one of the stories that I liked the most is.
Tell me, I can't wait to hear it.
You call it the damsel in distress. And after you tell a little bit about this story, I'll tell you why I picked this story. But can you I want you to tell the story because then we'll use that to unpack the other ideas. But tell us about the damsel in distress.
Well, you know what? So for all of the listeners, the damsel in distress, it's a story. It's funny that you say that, because a lot of people love that story. I think a lot of leaders, it resonated with them, because so often it's almost a taboo subject to talk about. A lot of times employees can talk about how they don't like their leaders, right? But we leaders never get a chance to talk about how there's somebody on our team we don't like either, right? And so what I wanted to do—
That's where she starts, by the way. I had this person on my team and I didn't like her.
I didn't like her, right? She drove me crazy. I think I used the word bonkers in the book. But I believe, if we're having an honest conversation, Kevin, every leader can relate to that. Every single one of us have had someone on the team where we're like, this one stretches me, right? And so that's what this story was about. And I showed my vulnerability on how, I would avoid trying to have meetings with her, because every time, I was around her, she was so dramatic. It drove me crazy. There was always something with this particular person. But what I realized is, this isn't for her. For her, there was a lot of series of events, and I won't go through all the details, but definitely read this part of the book, because there was a series of things that she was doing that just was going from bad to worse. And I could have done the easy thing, which is chalk it up as, she's not a fit, and let's keep this ball moving, right? Move her out of here. Or I could really look at myself and my leadership and figure out, where did I need to adjust? After all, I'm the leader. And that's what I chose to do, as you know, in the book. And once I spent some time getting to really know her, asking, listening, learning, then I realized some things about her life that made complete sense as to why she was how she was. And once I understood that, though it was different than me, I knew now I know what I'm working with, and I can make the proper adjustments so that I can actually help her win on this team. Because if she wins, I win as well, right?
Sure.
So that was really the premise for why I wrote that particular book. I wanted to hit a taboo subject that none of us ever talk about, which is sometimes as leaders, we have people on our team that we don't like. And how do you address that?
And at the end of the day, we don't, I always say this to folks about, you don't have to, usually with leaders, you're talking about they've got 2 team members that don't like each other. Like, I don't care if they don't have to be pals.
That's
but
right.
We have to get business results, right?
Right.
And the same is true for us as the boss. I don't have to be best pals. I don't have to really like that person, but we have to have the kind of working relationship that allows us to get great results together. And what I really like about the story is not just that you didn't like her to start with. Oh, that's a useful place to start. And I'm glad. And I was pretty confident that's why it was in the book. What I liked is that you took the time. You worked in the airline, so this was easier to say. I flew to, I believe she lived in Nashville. I flew to Nashville to have lunch with her. So I want everyone to think about this. She probably has, this other person, I probably has some clue that things with the boss are not rosy. And the boss is flying to see me and meeting at this restaurant. And she was probably highly stressed.
Yes.
And what you did when you got there was you acknowledged that. You said, hey, that's not, all of the things you've made up in your head are not why I'm here.
Right.
And then you spent the entire conversation about her. And that's the part I like about the story, is that when we think about people not like us, we think about all of the things you said before, demographics and all that stuff. And in terms of her, she was in rough terms your age. She was the same gender as you. And so some of the things that people might be saying are the things that are different actually weren't.
Right.
And yet barriers can get in the way. And what you then did was you made it, you spent the time to get to know her better. You didn't just go to have a coaching session with her. You went to get to know her, which gave you the perspective, as you said, to then come back. It's hard to be an ally with someone that you don't like, but it's harder to be an ally with someone that you don't understand.
Yes.
And
yes.
you got to the place of understanding her. You didn't say if you became friends and you were invited to her wedding or any of that stuff. That isn't the point of the story. But the point is you got to the place where you could be the leader she needed so she could be successful.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you for saying that. That's so well said. And that's exactly what I want people to get out of that story is, and you know, what's really interesting, Kevin, one of the reasons why I put that story in there is because I had made a social post about, what happens when you have someone on your team that you don't like, and it went viral. So I knew I was onto something because it's the taboo thing we never talk about, right? And so, but at the end of the day, I knew that every leader, either they've dealt with it or they will deal with it, especially again with all the different changes that we're working with now. And this is a very common question that I get because we have all the different generations working. So most of the generations that are in the leadership positions are like me and you, or they're our age, right? The boomers, the Gen X, and whatnot. And
we're not here to talk about my age, Stephanie. Just leave that out.
But you're looking good, Kevin, looking good. But, sometimes they're struggling with how do I lead, this generation, and they have a different, they work, thought process and so on and so forth. And so we're all dealing with something. But my point of that was to just to use my example and be very vulnerable on, hey, here's how I did it, because I didn't expect her to adjust at first. I needed to adjust. I needed to understand, and I needed to put myself in a place of being able to ask and listen and learn and not just assume, because that's where I was functioning up into that point, so that I could truly help her get to that next level.
So you've said them multiple times, ask, listen, learn. We'll get to the why in a second.
Yeah.
And you did say, well, those are pretty, there's nothing earth shattering
right
there in terms of deciding that as a leader, I'm going to really ask, I'm going to listen, I'm going to learn, but about what? So give us a little more context here, because those things would be true for any number of things for us as leaders, but specifically in this conversation about leading people who are not like us, what's your specific advice around ask, listen, and learn? Where should our focus be here?
Well, since you like acronyms, I'm going to go one step further, right? So there's an acronym, which is EARN. So you have to earn the right to be considered an ally. A lot of times people just throw the ally, I'm an ally, and it's like, okay, help me understand that based on what, and the reason why this is important. So let me give you the acronym, for EARN. EARN stands for the E. You have to establish an environment where people feel psychologically safe enough to be able to voice their opinion, right? Which may or may not agree with you, leader, but you've got to create that environment where they feel safe enough to be able to voice their opinion. The A stands for assure alignment. And the reason why that's super important is because the left hand has to know what the right hand's doing. And I have always been a believer that, part of the ways that you create a successful team or a successful business is to make sure that everybody in the business understands the business that they're in. Leaders would be shocked to know that most of your people don't know the business you're actually in. So I'll come back to that because I can go a deep diver on that. And then we have R, rally the troops. You get a bunch of people that feel safe enough to voice their opinion, whether they agree or disagree with you. And the left hand knows what the right hand's doing. They know what business they're in. How does it, how does what they do contribute to the overall business of what the company's there for? Then you now rally the troops on a common cause. You have an unstoppable team. I could literally stop right there. But then the N, because I'm in navigation or I'm in aviation, is all about how do you navigate the narrows. So you have to know, when are we trying to get to wherever we're trying to get to, by when, and how are we going to get there, right? So, and I'll use the example in aviation. A pilot would never get into the aircraft and not know where they're going, right? It doesn't work that way. Where are we going? How do I get there? How much fuel do I need? What route am I taking? Like, when do I need, but when, be there by when?
Yeah, have you ever been on the plane when the pilot says that another spot, and
Yeah.
sometimes they're doing it as a joke, and sometimes that was where they just came from.
Yeah.
And you're like, everyone on the plane, there's this until they realize that it was
exactly. Can you imagine being at the boarding gate, right? And the person's like, okay, hey, come on to this flight. We don't know where we're going, but you know what? Take a seat anyway.
We're going to take a poll and decide where to go. The majority's going to rule here, right? Oh, we don't have enough fuel to go there.
That's right. Exactly. So that's the EARN acronym for how you become an ally. Now, to answer your question, what are some of the things that you can do to even ask and go a little bit further? I'll give you an example of something that I used to do a ton, especially when I was leading sales teams. But even when I was leading companies, the best thing that a leader can do is to show their vulnerability. Now, I don't mean airing all your dirty laundry from home. I mean, like, just showing that you don't have all the answers. So for an example, the times I was leading sales teams, maybe it was, here's the new numbers that we have to do. Maybe it's some, astronomical jump, right? And I already know the sales team's going to be jawing like, what? So what I would do is, sit with the team and say, okay, guys, listen, we just had a board meeting. We've done the numbers and whatnot. And so here's what we have to bring in this year. And it's always going to be an increase. No matter what's going on in the world, it's always going to be an increase, right? And then I'd say, now I could really use your help on how you suggest we get there. And then you just let the team go for it, right? Again, you've got to earn the environment where they can feel safe enough to say, well, I think we should do this, or I think we should do that. And so they've got 100 ideas out there. Now, as leaders, we know most of those ideas probably won't fly, right? But that's not the time to kill the idea. Right now, I'm asking for all ideas. And so they're throwing it up there on the whiteboard. Now there's a lot of ideas. And now at that point, my next comeback is going to be, guys, great. Thank you so much. These are really, really some good stuff here. We can't do everything. So if we were just to pick our top 7, what do you guys think that should be? And then let them hash it out again, because now people have to defend their decisions or defend their ideas, right? Let them hash it out. Again, I'm not squashing the ideas, even though I know kind of which ones may or may not fly, right? But I'm letting it all come out. From there, now it's like, okay, great. So here's the 7. Now, how do we figure out, what we're going to do by when, right? I got to navigate this whole thing. And so at the end of the day, what I'm doing is I'm allowing them to come up with the solution to the problem. But I first have to get them in a place where they understand what the problem is. See, I always, as a leader, was completely, it was a non-negotiable for me. I will not have an ignorant team. This team has to know what business we're in, how does the business make money, right? And then also, how does what they do contribute to what we do? So whenever I've led companies, I was big on walk-a-miles. Everybody in the company had to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. So if I've got pilots in town and they're, learning, they're there for their recurrent training, I also want them to come into headquarters and now go sit and listen to, maybe a customer service person who has to make a reservation, right? Because now you get to understand how the business works. It's not just about you flying the plane. It's all the things that lead up to you being able to get on the plane and fly it, right? And so I need everybody to know how it all works. Again, I encourage leaders, you do something as simple as that. And by the way, I would have my board do it. You got to sit there and listen too. You know why? Because if I'm asking the board for more money to upgrade the IT system and they want to go, no, it's like, well, you know what? How about you just sit here and listen to how we have to do this, what all we have to do, all the steps we've got to take in order to actually book a trip, right? And then all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, you need an updated system. I do. You're right.
Really? Thank you. That's a good idea. Well, let's give you a budget for that. It's right here.
That's right.
So there's, and I deal with this in every one of these episodes as a bit of inside baseball for everyone. There's so many things that I could ask a guest. And obviously we're only touching the surface of what's in this book, Ally Leadership, How to Lead People Who Are Not Like You, by Stephanie Chung. There it is, if you're watching. So before we start to wrap up, is there anything that you wish I had asked that I didn't?
Well, one of the things that I just want to kind of, I guess, drive home a little bit is the one thing that I think tends to happen a lot these days is people are self-anointing themselves as an ally. So we'll go back to, me speaking. So I speak on the circuit, and a lot of times what will happen after I'm done speaking is people will come up, and we'll use men and women as an example. So men may come up and say, oh my gosh, Steph, I love this. I'm an ally to women. I'm a big ally. I've got, I'm married to the same woman. I've got 4 daughters. I'm a girl dad. I'm an ally. And though I love that, Kevin, my comeback is always the same. I'm like, that's fantastic. We need allies. This is great. Tell me what you've done this week to show your allyship towards women. And usually it's crickets. They can't give me actually any details. So what I would encourage for leaders is, you can't self-anoint yourself to be an ally, right? I can't say, well, you know what? I'm a nice person. I can't say that. You could say, I met Stephanie and I think she's a really nice person, but I can't self-anoint myself as a nice person. So what I really want leaders to realize is that, in order to be an ally, somebody else has to call you an ally. You can't just decide that. And especially if you don't have any real facts and figures and data points to back up the comment. And so that's really what I want leaders to know. And that's where ask, listen, learn, you take action comes into play. Because if you're an ally, you actually don't have to tell people. They can see it for themselves. Because
they're deciding. We're not deciding. They're deciding.
Exactly. They see you take action. So that's another thing I'd really want leaders to realize is that, you can't just decide you're an ally. You have to have the receipts to back up the comment.
I love that. So I'll just go here. As we start to finish, I'm curious. It's very clear that you have loved your career and you've loved the work that you've done and you love the work you're doing now. But what do you do for fun?
I'm a big self-care person because I travel so much. So my fun is all about how do I decompress? So on Sundays, I even Saturdays and Sundays, but Sundays, I usually once a month, every other week, I'll do a 2-hour Thai massage. So it's not relaxing. Just get all the kinks out of my body from sitting in a plane so much. So that's one way that I do self-care. I'm big into just kind of my own alone time, whether it's reading a book or just, listening to praise and worship music or really just studying more about my faith or what have you. So that's important to me. And then really just being around friends. This is something I'm actually focused on this year, is spending more time with my girlfriends and actually going out and people that I don't get to spend a whole lot of time with. So continually building that part as well. And then my last piece, and I just did this this past Sunday, is, one of the things that I kind of try to convey in the book is for every one of us to get to know people that are not like us. A lot of times what will happen, Kevin, is people will ask, well, how do I do that? It's like, what? Don't complicate this. Do not make this complicated. I really want this book to stress to everyone. You do not need a degree from MIT to figure this out. It is super simple. Your 5-year-old's doing it every day, right? So one of the ways that you can do it is just get yourself out of your environment and go into somebody else's environment. So this Sunday, there's a place, I live in Dallas. So there's a place, it's the Dallas Buddhist Temple place, beautiful botanical gardens. There's monks walking around. It's incredibly peaceful, but they also have food that's being cooked by people in the community, the Thai community, and all the proceeds go back to help the monks and what, whatever it is that they're doing from their nonprofit perspective. The food was amazing. I got to go have authentic Thai food, talk to different people that, were not of the same background and culture of myself, sit there and look at their beautiful botanical gardens. So what I want leaders to know is this isn't complicated. the biggest thing, you're not going to learn about other people reading about it. That's a good start, but you really need to go travel somewhere, go, to a local, area that every single community that's not like you has an art center or a culture center, or if nothing else, restaurants, right? Immerse yourself into other environments, and that's going to help you, because by default you're going to ask and you're going to listen and you're going to learn, and then that's going to help you be a much better leader to be able to lead today's modern workforce.
So you mentioned it as one of the things that you do for
Mhm.
fun. It's reading. So what are you reading these days?
I'm actually reading two books. It's funny. One is, a friend of mine wrote a book, and her book is called "Hers for the Taking." Her name is Tracy Newell, and the book is called "Hers for the Taking," and it's really a book about helping women get into boards. Or C-suite or boards, and so I'm super passionate about that. And so I love Tracy's book, so I'm reading it now. It just came out. Another thing that I'm actually reading, I just spoke at John Maxwell's leadership conference, and he gifted me a Maxwell Leadership Bible. And so, though I've read the Bible and I read the Bible, but I really love in this particular Bible because it takes each of the different verses and then sums it up from a leadership perspective, like to help give us guidance as how to be better leaders, right? Based on biblical principles. And so that's another book that I'm really, really, really loving. It's a beautiful Bible, but it's like it's just a different perspective that I'm really enjoying.
We'll have links to both of those books, as we always do, in the show notes, but we'll also have links to Stephanie's book. But Stephanie, where do you want to point people? How can they get to know more about you and your work?
Probably the easiest place is just go to stephaniechung.com. That has all my links to all my socials. If you'd like to link up with me, I'm on every social channel. And then also, if you're a leader who wants to continue to learn more, I've got a weekly newsletter that goes out under Your Ally in Leadership. So yourallyinleadership.com, and there it is about basically science-based, how do you lead and succeed based on science. And so it's very neuroscience driven, and it's probably some of my best work. So those are the two places I would tell people to go.
There you go. You can get it all by starting at stephaniechung.com.
Yes.
And so now, before we go, the question that I ask all of you listeners and viewers every single episode is this: now what? Now what? What are you going to do now? Now, that could be, well, I'm going to go order a book. That's fine. If you do that every week, then you're starting to read almost as much as Kevin. But that's not really what I'm saying here, even though I do hope that you order a copy of the book. The real question is, what did you take from this situation, from this conversation, that you want to go do something with, right? The why in Ally is you take action. What action will you take? What insight did you get from this? What did you underline mentally as we were going through it? And answer this question. And now what? Now that I learned this from Stephanie, what action will I take? When you ask and answer that question, then the last 30 minutes will have been a great investment for you, which is what I hope it is for you every single week. So Stephanie, thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Kevin. This was fun.
And everybody, if you thought it was fun like Stephanie did, then make sure you tell someone else so they come and listen, and make sure that both they and you are subscribed wherever you're watching or listening to this from, so you don't miss any episodes of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.